No, if you're a victim and you can ascribe moral superiority to yourself, then you're justified in the use of force. And I did a paper with a student of mine who toured the mass graves in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia with the UN, and we looked at the precursors to genocide, and one of them was an enhanced sense of victimization. That allows you to lash out at the hypothetical perpetrators before they do anything, because you're being victimized. You saw the same thing to some degree in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Hitler.
Because,
Hitler felt very victimized.
Yeah, Hitler claimed that the Jews were victimizing Germany, essentially. And so once you're a victim and you have all the moral status that goes along with being a victim, then you can't do any wrong, essentially. Right. So.
Remember that Drexel professor who wanted white genocide for Christmas? I hate even saying that. Well, he's back, and he's now blaming whiteness for the Texas church shooting. Take a listen.
Whiteness is a structure of privilege, and it's a structure of power, and it's a structure that when it feels threatened, lashes out.
Wow. The man accused of assaulting Republican Senator Rand Paul pleading not guilty, but the mystery about what led to this. Paul, by the way, has 6 fractured ribs and bruises to his lungs. This was incredibly serious. And now the mystery is deepening because neighbors say it's impossible to believe the motive was really a feud over leaves and lawn clippings on a shared property line. And one of the senator's advisors today says the Pauls haven't talked to the suspect for years. Drew Griffin is out front.
Are we going to get any explanation?
Rene Boucher silently entered court this morning, pleaded not guilty, and within minutes had slipped out a back door with his attorney, avoiding more than a dozen members of the media, still trying to get one question answered. Why did you do it? Boucher is accused of blindsiding U.S. Senator Rand Paul last Friday, tackling him while the senator was cutting his own lawn, landing Boucher in court, and the senator recovering from 6 broken ribs and fluid around his lungs. For 17 years, these two men have been neighbors, sharing this property line in a gated community just outside Bowling Green, Kentucky. An investigation is continuing, and Boucher's 4th-degree misdemeanor assault charges could, according to Warren County Attorney Amy Milliken, become much more serious due to Senator Paul's injuries. Boucher is a retired anesthesiologist and Democrat who has posted anti-Trump messages on his now shut-down Facebook account. Rand Paul is an ophthalmologist and staunch conservative Republican. That is enough to fuel right-wing speculation. Senator Paul was attacked for political reasons.
So there's this group on campus called SQE. They're basically a socialist organization run by students, but students who aren't really students at all. They're working on campus, and they're funded by the California Faculty Association. For the past 2 years, they've been going after us as a club and conservatives in general for our free speech, trying to stifle us. And it's been a battle. After one of our students was punched by a professor, they opposed us. We tried to pass a resolution with our student government to get any professor that punches a student, physically assaults a student, fired. And they opposed us on that, and then they opposed us in bringing Milo and tried to get him denounced and tried to get his speech denounced. There was a protest against Trump, and the college Republicans were doing a counter-protest. Everything was really peaceful between the two groups. No one was really, they were discussing, but nothing other than that. This professor comes along and starts talking to the students, the college Republicans, and says that they're uneducated. They don't have any professors with them, of course, because they aren't educated. He actually tripped over a bike rack, and the students laughed because that's funny. And he got mad, started lashing out, tried to rip posters from their hands, actually punched a student, I think knocked another woman down. I think she worked for Student Life and Leadership. And that's basically what went down. He was frustrated because he embarrassed himself and because he didn't like what the students had to say. So the professor who assaulted some conservative students last semester still has a job on campus. He is teaching 2 classes, part-time anthropology. He was suspended actually for 3 months, so basically over the summer. And then after 2 investigations, one internally in the school and one externally, they both said, yeah, he did it, but 3 months punishment is good enough. He can come back and teach again. So as a student organization, we have brought a lot of attention to the issue of violent professors, especially on this campus, through our attempts to pass legislation with the student government, through our press releases, through tabling on campus, and that just obviously went nowhere because that professor is still teaching, so that's unfortunate.
style schools, remember, colleges. They were offering these poor, grieving, spoiled brats counseling. All the liberals needed things like therapy dogs, hot cocoa, Play-Doh, just to cope. In retrospect, it's actually laughable how lame these people were and how out of touch, by the way. You know, for example, Hollywood liberals and celebrities, they joined this collective left-wing freakout, launching all kinds of vicious and vile attacks against President Trump, and it's gone on for an entire year. Watch this.
How dare he say the things he does? Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right. Yes. I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House. I am a nasty woman. I'm not as nasty as a man who looks like he bathes in Cheeto dust.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? I want to clarify, I'm not an actor. I lie for a living. However, it's been a while, and maybe it's time.
What a year. And if you thought that was bad, we also have, remember, Kathy Griffin's disgusting photo shoot that we always have to give you a viewer warning about because it's so graphic. Here, Griffin posing like an ISIS fighter with a fake, bloody head that looks like President Trump. And if that wasn't enough, there was the Shakespeare in the Park play where a Trump-like character was assassinated on stage. This liberal hatred, for 1 year, no bounds do they know. And of course, the Destroy Trump media, well, they got in on all the action. They've become so unhinged, lying, dishonesty at a level we've never seen before. We've had to now coin new terms just to describe them. Trump derangement syndrome, the media's Trump psychosis. Watch this.
There's a sign out there that's been hung up in the White House or outside the White House saying, if you're not white, you're not especially welcome.
This is a man who is not well. He alternated between being a whiny 6-year-old who's had his Nintendo taken away and between being the cranky old man who's out there condemning everyone who doesn't worship him adequately.
Donald Trump, short of only maybe Woodrow Wilson and Andrew Jackson, is being himself more than any other previous president with disgraceful racial views.
We can surely say his words have absolutely emboldened white supremacists.
You know, it's a tough night. I think for normal people, you got a lot of people at home going through Kleenex right now. I'm just hurt. I'm sitting here hurt, and I think a lot of people are hurt tonight.
The presidency itself is in question. Our relationships around the world, in question. Trust in the president himself, in question.
He said today, America first. It was not just the racial, I should say racial, the Hitlerian background to it.
Is Donald Trump competent to be president?
President Trump say America first. Tonight, President Trump put himself first.
A little whiff of fascism tonight, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely.
Here you have a deranged president or a pathologically lying president lying about the operations of the American government.
Trump's critics, those who are worried about this president and this White House, saw a live special television event brought to you by narcissism, thin skin, chaos, and deeply personal grievances.
Imagine saying those things about President Obama? Never. This media has treated President Trump so badly, even former Democratic President Jimmy Carter was forced to admit he's never seen anything like it. And by the way, we can throw in the unprecedented obstruction, of course, from the Democrats. President Trump could literally cure cancer, turn water into wine, end poverty, and the left in this country and the media would still never give him credit. They hate him that much.
Professor from the University of Toronto and the author of the upcoming book, 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Doctor, good morning to you. Thanks for making a couch call today.
You bet.
What do you make of this Drexel professor who's been in and out of the news so often, and now he's blaming that for the cause of the shooting in Texas?
I think he's applying his ideological formula to a very complex problem. And it's an easy thing to do. It's this sort of postmodern formula that's taught to university students everywhere now.
What is the formula?
Attribute everything to racial disparity and oppression, victimization.
Just everything?
Well, essentially, it's a recasting of Marxism, I would say. And with the Marxist theory, it was rich against poor, bourgeoisie against proletariat. And that was recast in the 1970s as oppression due to group identity, essentially, and so that's where identity politics came from. It's a formula you can learn in about a day, and then you can use it to explain everything.
College is designed to teach you to think about the world and prepare you for the world outside of college. How is this helping that, and what kind of students are we getting when they're 22, 23, whenever they graduate?
You have the tense wrong. College was that.
Understood.
So, and I don't think it is that in many cases now, especially in the liberal arts, and that's a real catastrophe.
Much different than my experience 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, things have changed dramatically in the last 5 years, I would say. And we saw this rise of political correctness in the 1990s. It burst forward in between 1990 and about 1993. And then it seemed to subside a little bit, but it's back with an absolute vengeance now. And we know that most of the university campuses, in the liberal arts anyways, are heavily dominated by leftist thinking, and radical leftist thinking for that matter.
Well, what happened, Doctor, in the early 90s to spawn this?
Well, I think it's popped up more or less repeatedly since the late 1960s. I'm not sure exactly why.
Started with the anti-war movement?
Yeah, with the anti-war movement, but there was a fair bit of radical thinking in the 1960s on the left side, and many of those people ended up teaching in universities. And so, and with the rise of postmodernism, that's a huge factor. That was a French intellectual school that was a transformation of Marxism into identity politics, essentially. And because I think, in some sense, because it requires almost no intellectual effort and leaves you with an overwhelming sense of moral superiority, it's very attractive to people. They're basically teaching young people, I would say, to be ideological avatars, to go act out this pernicious doctrine in the real world.
Some of them were doing that. They were howling at the moon. They were screaming in the night. They were upset at the year anniversary a few days ago of President Trump being elected. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of that is a kind of narcissism. You know, I mean, that sort of public display. It's probably amplified to a great degree by social media and media in general, right? Because this sort of highly emotional display does make a reasonable news clip. But
what's the danger here?
Well, the danger is everywhere at the moment. The danger is increased polarization. We're seeing that nonstop at the moment, and I think it's mostly because the people on the radical left are pushing way too hard. That's my estimate. You see that in Canada as well as the United States and all around the Western world.
I want to ask you this because I live in a very Democratic state, Connecticut, right?
Yep.
None of my friends would ever operate like this. Now, granted, my friends are older. They find this reprehensible. So I mean, it seems like a lot of Democrats are fired up about this idiocy.
Oh, yeah. Well, lots of people who were in what you might describe as the liberal center are very unhappy that the political landscape on the left side has shifted way over to the radical leftist side. That's a very common sentiment now. And I think it's happening faster than people really understand. So it's almost impossible to overstate how influential these postmodern doctrines have become and how they're seeping in now into corporations, mostly through HR departments.
I read an article, and it was about Barbara Corcoran, and she was talking about people she hires and doesn't hire. And when she's investing in companies like we see on Shark Tank, she says if you're a victim, she hates the word victim and people who have that victimized mentality, where they are the victim, woe is me. Do you see that more and more? Is that like a millennial thing, or is it...
Well, it's a form of justification for the use of power. You know, if you're a victim and you can ascribe moral superiority to yourself, then you're justified in the use of force. And I did a paper with a student of mine who toured the mass graves in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia with the UN, and we looked at the precursors to genocide, and one of them was an enhanced sense of victimization. That allows you to lash out at the hypothetical perpetrators before they do anything, because you're being victimized. You saw the same thing to some degree in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Hitler. Hitler felt very victimized.
Yeah, Hitler claimed that the Jews were victimizing Germany, essentially. And so once you're a victim and you have all the moral status that goes along with being a victim, then you can't do any wrong, essentially. So.
Interesting discussion. Dr. Jordan Peterson's new book is called 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, which we certainly need now. Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.